Okay, I think we'll get started here. Good morning. My name is Melinda Berdanier, and I am the Grants Coordinator at the South Dakota Humanities Council. And I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the South Dakota Council, which produces the annual Festival of Books. We're so pleased that you've joined us for our virtual 2021 event. We would like to acknowledge first and foremost that this program comes to you from the ground, which is the homeland of the Oceti-Sakowin, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. The South Dakota Humanities Council honors and appreciates the Indigenous people who have the longest relationship to this place. Before the event gets underway, I'd like to share some housekeeping details. We ask that you keep your microphone muted throughout the event to minimize the background noise. If you'd like to ask questions or share comments with today's presenters, you can type them into the chat section on Zoom, which you can open by clicking on the conversation bubble at the bottom of your screen, or you can do it in the comments section on Facebook, and we'll pass along as many as possible at the end of the session. If you wish, we will also allow you to unmute at the end of the session so you can ask your questions directly. We encourage you to buy books by our presenting authors at your local independent bookstore. Our official booksellers are Books A Million and the Birdcage Bookstore and Mercantile, which are both in Rapid City. You can also buy directly from authors and publishers. And I'll put some links for these in the chat. To help us continue to improve the festival, we'd appreciate your filling out an evaluation form. We'll share a link in the chat section on Zoom, and we'll also email you a link to the survey at the conclusion of the festival. Finally, you can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. Just visit our website, sdhumanities.org, and click the donate button. The festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who've already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of our festival guide and on our website. And here's our festival guide. And now on with the show. This program is called An Inside Look at Journal Editing, and it features two presenters. First, we have Jim Reese. Jim is an associate professor of English and director of the Great Plains Writers Tour at Mount Marty University in Yankton, South Dakota. He has spoken at venues from the Library of Congress to San Quentin Prison. Reese's awards include a first place Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award and a Distinguished Public Service Award in recognition of his contributions to the Education Department at the Federal Prison Camp Yankton. His fourth poetry collection, Dancing Room Only, is coming this year. We also have Stephen Wingate. Stephen is the author of the novels The Leave Takers and of Fathers and Fire, and the short story collection Wife Shopping, which won the Bakeless Prize in Fiction from Bread Loaf Writers Conference. His experimental work includes the prose poem collection 31 Octets and the digital interactive memoir Daddy Labyrinth. Wingate has taught at the University of Colorado and the College of the Holy Cross, and he's now Associate Professor of English at South Dakota State University. First, we'll hear from both Jim and Steve, and then I can ask questions that you've provided in the chat, and we'll continue discussion from there. So now I'll turn the program over to you.
Hey, everybody. This is Steve. Jim asked me to talk first, so I'll talk first. And what we wanted to talk about to kind of get the ball rolling here is kind of our history, how we got into publishing literary magazines. My history is kind of long and twisted. I always knew that I wanted to do something with publishing. This was when I was in undergrad a long time ago. It was something that I had a lot of interest in because I guess I wanted to seize the means of production. I must have had a Marxist professor at some point in time who told me to seize the means of production. So I thought, oh, great, I want to be a writer. I should get involved in publishing as well. So that seed was planted early. Nothing really much happened with it while I was in undergrad, except me hustling around to find jobs, part-time work in publishing. So when I was in Boston in the mid to late 80s. I was working for Beacon Press and Houghton Mifflin, learning publishing production, learning some of those the other skills that you need to be involved in publishing. And I just kind of learned some things there, took a different direction in my career, and came back to literature about 10 years later, when I was at the University of Colorado, and I ran into a magazine that needed help. It was called Black Ice. It was an experimental magazine from Fiction Collective 2, and it was essentially a series of boxes on someone's office floor that no one had gone through in a year. So I gathered a couple of friends, dove in, and that was kind of the first real editing experience. Another wonderful thing I learned is that even if you do the work, you don't always get credited for it, because I did the work with my buddy and someone else was the editor ultimately, because they swooped in at the last moment and said, oh yes, this is what I meant to do all along. So that was kind of fun. And from there, I started just planning the next magazine. And when I was in Boulder, 2003, I did this magazine called Divide. And I just kind of scraped together money for it from various university sources, and was really, really happy with it. We put out about 5 issues before the money went away. And then when I also have been involved in a digital magazine called Fiction Writers Review since about 2008, and we have about a million hits, not a million, a 250,000 hits a year. And we're mostly doing craft essays, interviews, and reviews by emerging authors. So people who usually have typically 3 or fewer books, trying to get some press specifically dedicated to them. And here at SDSU, I took over Oakwood. And Oakwood had been, when I got here in 2011, it was a student magazine. And basically students would gather together stuff and throw it over to the art department, and they would lay it out however they felt like laying it out that year. And so it would change from year to year and look kind of strange. And I said, maybe, if you're going to be a literary magazine, you should have some kind of consistent identity so that people know what you are about, and that there's just some kind of sense of identity there. So it's easier for people to say, hey, I want to be in Oakwood. I want to be in whatever this magazine is. And at SDSU, I've also, one of the things that I did is I started to turn Oakwood into a course, because it takes a lot of work to do a literary magazine. And it's nice to have some help. So I get some student help for that by getting them to enroll in a course. And the other thing is that we're hopefully giving our students some opportunities to work producing magazines, making documents that give them some really translatable skills for when they get outside. For instance, not everyone knows how to work with a printer. And so the students who work with Oakwood, they'll have an idea of how to work with a printer and what some of the basic ideas behind putting a book out are. You have to know the PPI count, the pages per inch count of the paper you're going to use. There's all these little production details that are important to know. So one of my goals for Oakwood is for it to continue to be a teaching platform, so that our students can figure out how to do this, because who knows, they might want to start their own magazine somewhere down the road as well.
I like all that. It's about 12 after right now, and I know that Steve and I, when we were talking, if you have a question, let us know right away. Just anything specific instead of, because like Steve, I've done various different journals. Started with a professor. I started a small press. I'm going to try and do this in 2 minutes. Started a small press when I was an undergraduate called Logan House Press. Books are heavy was our slogan. And I went to get my PhD from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, I got my master's, University of Nebraska in Lincoln. I worked on my PhD, received my PhD from there, and was one of the initial screeners and, initial reviewers if you sent your work into Prairie Schooner. And then I worked on their book prize as well. So that might be something of interest to you. Who are these initial screeners? Every place I've worked, they've been students, and that's an interesting discussion right there. And then as you're sending your work out, how much experience do these initial screeners have to judge your work? And, to give you any idea, Steve talked about the Fiction Writers Review. They're getting about a 250,000 hits, if not more, a year for the Fiction Writers Review that he works with. In Paddlefish, by the time I got here to Mount Marty University, the first couple years we had, Paddlefish was a national literary journal. And we would have a submission period for 3 months. So I think at the busiest month we had one time was, and now it's either 1,500 or 2,000 submissions in a month. It was a lot. It was crazy because we'd just go, and that was, I should say maybe that was 2 months, because I would just go down to the mail office and there would just be a big box there. And I would take the box into my classroom, like Steve said, and I'd put it on the ground. I said, let's start reading. And my students are like, how do we know if this is good? I'm like, you go to a movie, don't you? You know if you like it or if you don't like it. When you walk out of that movie theater, same thing. So pick it up, open it up, and we start reading. And that's how we started. I mean, there was no magic button or this is so great because of this. I mean, first, did they like it? They had to be entertained, and they were the initial readers, and we just jumped right in that way. The last journal that I continued to edit, so I've been doing that. Paddlefish is really more of a student journal now. We are branching back out to include other work in it, but it's an online issue now, and I think the students would like to see it in print again, so we're going to do that again, I think, hopefully soon. I'm talking to some people about that, but one thing you should know as I'm saying that out loud is you can host your own literary journal for free at a place called Issuu, which is issuu.com. They house over 25,000 magazines and journals for free, and there's all kinds of different services there. So again, that's issuu.com. So even for Paddlefish, the Student Literary Journal, that's where we host it. And also I publish a journal called 4 p.m. Count. It's a joint publication between the National Endowment for the Arts and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And that's a journal that isn't for sale. We give it away for educational purposes. And it's called 4 p.m. Count. You can go to my website, jimreese.org, to sign up. If you want a copy sent to you, go there and there's a sign up sheet and we can talk about that more. I'm not seeing any questions yet, Melinda. But so as soon as I see one pop up, we can answer it. I think to our knowledge, we'll be able to see the question, and Steve, interrupt me or whatever you think, but I think that's kind of interesting to people right away too, like what's the market like for, if we're just talking about journals, just the thousands of submissions people are getting. And I don't think anything's changed from when I was in grad school as far as when I was trying to get published at first. Now my latest book is a nonfiction book called Bone Chalk, which the announcer didn't announce. So I'm branching into even a different, real serious about a different genre. But at this time, I'm at this stage of my game, I do know a lot of editors at different magazines, which helps. You might be able to say, hey, I've got a piece and get their attention that way. But most of them still don't like that. They want you to go through the traditional route, which is submit just like anybody else. And that is usually through Submittable now on most journals that I can still tell. And I think it's still just highly, highly competitive. But again, what's your hook? Are you getting your reader's attention right away and enough to make them want to sit down and read the whole piece? And Steve's putting up a link to Oakwood, which is cool.
Yeah, this is the main interface for Oakwood. We are print right now, but we do have a presence on an issue. So what we do is every year, well, except last year because of the pandemic, every year we put out that print issue, and then we a little bit later put it up on Issuu. So it's a PDF of the journal, and it looks pretty, and anyone in the world can see it. We are also through a cooperative program with the library. I've recently had the entire history of Oakwood, which goes back to 1975, digitized on a platform called B Press, Berkeley Educational Press. So that is where the Briggs Library does all of its archiving, or most of its archiving. So now Oakwood is on there. If you wanted to go to visit an old issue of Oakwood, you can actually go and check out issues from 1975 and 1977. And it's funny, last time I got a note from B Press saying, hey, here are the people who are coming to visit your site. It was the stuff in the 70s that people were coming to visit most. So that was really, really interesting. It is a really competitive, super competitive marketplace. And I don't know how much we want this conversation to be about the perspective of the submitter to the magazine versus the perspective of the people who are running the magazine. But I think those are dynamics they're closely intertwined. You often have very highly overworked people fielding a ton of submissions. And the easiest submissions to get rid of are the people who haven't really read your submission guidelines. For instance, for Oakwood, even though our submission season is not open yet, I just received a submission the other day from the Ukraine. Hey, here's my poetry from the Ukraine. And Oakwood is a regional journal. We want to publish people who have a connection to South Dakota or the states that are connected to it. So if you say grew up here and then you move to New York City and you're writing about South Dakota, then cool, that's what we want. But this person was just from the Ukraine and they'd never been here and they had no connection. So they did not read the instructions. They were just sort of shooting out the submissions to whoever they saw, which is really a highly ineffective way to do things, and doesn't make editors very happy, because then we have to slog through a bunch of stuff that's completely inappropriate to the journal. The good thing is that those things are easy to get rid of off the pile. If you're an editor and you're ultimately reading many things, you want to have those screeners that Jim was talking about. You need to have those screeners, because otherwise you're dealing with this much of a pile all the time. And how can you do that justice? What you end up doing is just making really amazing, quick decisions about things that really you should give a little more time to. I would like to give at least 2 pages to a short story before I say, well, this is something that's going to draw me in or not. But if I've got a pile that's that big, I don't have time for those 2 pages. I have time for those 2 paragraphs, and it better draw me faster. So that's kind of a little bit of the life of the people on this end who are editing. Is we're trying to make sure that we can stay alive and not burn out, and continue to edit in a way that's going to produce a really good journal, and that will be a carefully considered submission process. And when we're overloaded and don't have help, that there's no secret that level of care is going to drop.
And I think if you're interested, I'm trying to think of some questions that people might have until we start seeing some places, a couple platforms you might want to check out right away, as far as submissions and their guidelines. What to talk about, to what Steve's talking about too, is one is Duotrope, and another one is, well, there's Creative Writing Ops blog now. It used to, so just Google like Creative Writing Ops for opportunities. They have a blog. Duotrope. What I'm forgetting another one. New Pages. Those are 3 places where and I think Duotrope you can pay a subscription fee. Obviously you can Google like what are the 50 best nonfiction journals to publish in, or what are the 20 best nonfiction or fiction mystery places. That's what I like about Duotrope and New Pages. They you can really define the genre, find out what their submission period is, do they pay or not, Everybody wants to know that, right? Which is nice. And what else? I mean, what is the submission period? What is the reading period? Like, when are you going to get an answer? So it used to be, we used to always have this. This was the kind of joke, right? Like, I remember being on panels in late 90s, early 2000s, where a journal would say, well, we want you to submit to us and us only. No simultaneous submissions. Well, first of all, who's going to know unless you tell them? Second of all, the life of you sitting at home submitting to one journal and then waiting 6 to 8 months to get a result, and then if you get a rejection, then you wait and then you send out that piece again 6 to 8 months later. Well, that's going to eat about 20 years of your life, and then for that one piece. So my advice to you is to submit to tons of people, especially if you're starting, if you're an emerging writer. I would take your piece. If Kuzer was here, he said this to us too, and I remember, and I've always kind of kept to this. Ted Kuzer, I was going to school when he won the Pulitzer Prize and became the United States Poet Laureate. So as grad students, we're sending out poems all the time, right? Because you have to get published, you have to get a book contract if you want to get a job in higher education. You just have to. There was no sugarcoating anything. It was like, you guys better get busy and do it now. And Ted would say, look, when you have 20 to 40 poems published, that's when you need to start looking for a publisher. Okay, and I remember hearing that and going, oh, and then Janice Agee was also, she was my advisor. So here you have a real famous fiction writer. And same kind of thing. She said, Jim, stop thinking about chapbooks, start thinking about books. And so some of us were highly competitive, which was good. And we had that mindset and we just went at it. So I would have just three, usually 2 or 3 poems that I was sending out to a journal with my cover letter, with my self-addressed stamped envelope. And I was spending all the little money I had as a new father, as a grad student, sending poems out in the mail. And that's what you have to do, though. And I would send out 30 to 40 of the same thing to 30 or 40 places. And Ted would tell you, look, if you get all 40 rejections back from one piece, then you might want to reevaluate that piece, look at it again, talk to some people who are going to give you some serious feedback. There might be something wrong. It's so competitive, though. I mean, who's to say on the flip side of that you send it out to 30 or 40 places and they just have way too many submissions and they're barely looking at your piece. So you don't always know. If you really believe, when you've written something good, if you're honest with yourself and you've published before, and if something's good or not. If something's almost there, that too, and you'll send that out. I'm guilty of that, saying, I think this is almost there. Let me start sending it out. But it's just swamped. So, and then when you meet somebody and get published in a journal, I would make sure you send them a thank you card. Steve, I don't know if we've joked about this before, but I can count still on 2 hands the number of thank you cards or postcards I've probably received from authors in the last 20 plus years. And you remember that, not that it's just something to do, right? Like you give a presentation somewhere, like for us, like, hey, thanks to the South Dakota Humanities Council, we're all trying to work together and it does help people remember that kind of things. It's business. It's business 101, right? Be kind to the people that are feeding you.
I'm curious here if just in terms of the direction of our conversation, how many people are thinking about or here for this panel because you're talking to editors and want to sort of see how editors work from the perspective of the writer, and how many people here are actually interested in publishing. I don't know, Melinda, if there's any way to do a poll. That sounds actually too complex. I'd just be curious to see in the chat if you are a person who is trying to who is interested in publishing and being a publisher, just to self-identify on the chat so that we know how many of you are out there, because a lot of times people who come to a panel like this are mostly interested in how do I understand the mind of the editor and figure out how the editor works. So if you are a person who is interested in, say, starting a magazine or has a magazine that you want to develop, I think that would be really helpful to know for us, so that we can kind of make sure that the conversation meanders in that direction. I think that failing that, we'll probably just talk about what life is like from our perspective, and hopefully shine a light on the process for the people who are trying to get their work published, which very often is the kind of people who would show up at a panel like this. Like I said before, the hardest thing is to make sure that you are getting some kind of work that fits with the integrity of your vision for the magazine. And you get a lot of it's a wheat from chaff situation. These poems from the Ukraine, these photographs of Italy that I've gotten with Oakwood, they're easy to get away, but they're a tremendous amount of clutter. If you're going from the perspective of if you have a particular magazine that you have a vision for, you've got to find a way to articulate what that vision is for people. And if you don't do it, then you're going to get a greater proportion of work that is not really in your wheelhouse.
Hey, here's a
So
question, Steve.
We have a question.
Here's a question too.
Oh, cool. Andrea, I'm an editor for Flash Fiction magazine. I'm here to get more advice on how to streamline the editing process from other editors with more experience. Wow. First of all, Andrea, do you have readers, and do you have a set way of distributing work to readers? And if you're getting all of that reading yourself, that obviously all of the onus is on you to figure out what's good and what's not. If you're able to recruit readers, then that can take some of that pressure off. But what you need in order to do that is a set of guidelines about how we're going to proceed. For instance, a lot of people will do a spreadsheet on Google Docs these days. If you can't afford, submittable software where you can mark all that stuff up on a program, then often just having a Google Doc with reader 1 comments, reader 2 comments, that can make life a whole lot easier in a very inexpensive way for you to manage the activities of other readers. And because we're on the internet, you don't have to necessarily be physically in a place in order to do that.
Are you getting your submissions, Flash Fiction? Okay, somebody answered that question. So are you getting your submissions through Submittable for Oakwood?
No, we're not. Well, I did
still doing hard copies
for a little while. Yeah, Submittable.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know what Submittable is, it's a program. It's kind of taken the publishing world by storm. It's a way. It's allows the publisher to basically set up an account that receives digital submissions from anywhere. So usually people are paying a little bit of money to submit to your journal. Some of that money goes to Submittable, of course, and some of it actually goes to the journal as well. Most of the time, people are paying $2 or $3 to publish something, which is about what you would spend for putting it in the mail and having a self-addressed stamped envelope with it as well. So it's kind of a wash in terms of money. And what it does for the journal is that if you buy the right package, you can actually manage your submissions pretty easily and pretty well. I did it for a prize that we were running for a little while until the money ran out, and it's pretty expensive. So we didn't stick with it. But if you have a fairly high volume journal, then Submittable makes a lot of sense, because then you can kind of offload to them some of the management of your submissions, and you don't have to physically keep track of what you've rejected and accepted, because you're just clicking the box on Submittable and you're sending that email out to that person automatically. But if you're not at that volume to the point where you can afford to pay for Submittable, and maybe you'd rather put your money into, your web hosting or your actual print journal, then doing something with Google Sheets, or some kind of shared document, and trying to recruit editors. There are lots of people out there who want to put their name on the masthead of a magazine. It is a very Machiavellian type of world here in publishing and creative writing. And many people start making their names by saying, I am an associate editor at so-and-so and such and such. So if you're, editors who are feeling overwhelmed, inviting people in to the process of editing can be a really good thing. But to do that well, I think you need to build a structure so that there's accountability and that there's tracking. Because the worst thing that can happen is, you give somebody a pile of something and they just lose it. And then the magazine looks really bad.
That's what's neat about, I think Duotrope or both, check those places out that I mentioned, because they'll tell you what the response rate is, and they'll give you different analytics, like what Steve is mentioning, real specifics, like what, comments, their submission periods are, if they're doing things, if they're not being lousy about things, then they're kind of the watchdog for certain things like that. So all those places could help you with your question about streamlining. And I asked Steve about hard copy or submittable because, even I like reading stuff on paper, right? So, but again, it depends on the volume. If you're just getting 10 to, let's say 10 to 100 submissions a month, that's pretty manageable with just paper, right? But once you start getting, I would say 200 to 1,000 or more, that's a lot. And so again, it's just being a writer. How are you going to get your editors or the publisher's attention? Well, if I'm looking at a bunch of titles of stuff, I'm gonna click on the title that interests me, and that's it. If I get a title that says, sunshine, that means nothing to me, right? And I'm not going to click on it because it's, or because I've seen it a million times. I'm going to click on the title that gets my attention. So that would be the first thing, right? As an editor, that's an easy way to streamline stuff. If they're not grabbing your attention by the title, maybe it doesn't even get looked at. It depends if you have that many submissions, if you have thousands and thousands, right? I mean, think of the queries that the New York or the New York Times or Mother Jones or anybody gets on a daily basis. They might, and they'll tell you right away, look, we get so many queries for people, that want us to just read a paragraph about something that they want to submit, right? That's that level of the game, right? Here, will you please just read a paragraph about something I want to submit to you? So these are just, so if I would say that's a real easy thing to weed through. I don't think there's again, as an editor, it's like, look, if you want good stuff, then go click on the good stuff. If you're getting stuff from Ukraine, like Steve said, I wouldn't even open the envelope. I would look at it.
Definitely want to read everything.
Yeah.
We don't know how much of it we're going to read. But one thing that we do that helps the process is to try not to make decisions from the big stack, but to take that big stack and make it smaller. So for instance, I know that our initial readings, because our submissions are electronic directly to Oakwood, our initial readings are going to be on the screen. And if enough people say, hey, that's an interesting one, then we print it out. And so we make a smaller stack. So if this many are going to get in, and this many first come through the transom, first we want a way to winnow those down, and then we take a closer look, so that the real reading, the fun stuff of the editing is not always going to be applied to all of these things, because then you lose your mind. Then we winnow it down first, and then we enter into that. It's kind of two species of attention. One species of attention, that first one where you're working with the big stack, is saying, is this worth really, really looking at closely? And then you got that much smaller stack. So it's a question of making your own editorial process more efficient. I guess Andra that was kind of the question that you started with. How do I make it more efficient? Getting from the big stack to the small stack. And then you don't have to feel like you're compromising yourself, because the stuff that really drew your attention, then you really are giving it that fun editorial read. And I think most editors want to preserve that. And you're hearing from both Jim and me is that there's so much work here that we're not able to preserve that for every single submission. But if we strategize and reduce the size of that pile, we can still have that editorial experience where you feel like, this is why I became an editor, because I want to read a bunch of stuff and really interact with it. Someone brought up the money question.
I think all of those, I would be real, if you don't have a lot of money, and even with money, I'd be real hesitant about advertising and where you're advertising. I think right now, that's my big argument I've told with Steve. I think what I see happening and what I've seen happen since I've started this, and I started when I was 22, and I'm not that old. But I've been doing it for 20 years. And what I think I see all the time is people want to put their stamp on something. Like, you can publish a book now so easy. Like, Steve and I could start a press today, call it Steve's Press, and in a week we have a book out in your hands. And we could do it. And if we had a few hours, we could, we had the manuscript, we could do it that quick, easy, right? You have to build a reputation, advertise. I would try to find the people to work with you first, and then look at your social media platforms. What I'd like to see journals and publishers do is spend a good 6 months marketing a book, right? Everybody talks about a shelf life of a book or a journal. And it can be anywhere from, a month to 3 months for a book, and what's your publisher doing for your book? And I think if you're working in our setting with students, I'm really interested, because I think my students would be interested in this the most, is, and Steve mentioned it too, you're making a document, 2, marketing, that they're going to use both of those skills in any kind of job that they have, making documents, marketing, and then really what's effective, right? It's a business in a sense. How are you going to get the attention of, Steve can do the Journal Oakwood, and it's a beautiful looking journal. It looks cool. But how do I know about it? And I live in the same state. The only reason I really know about it, to be honest, is because I was in it, but I'm only just a few hours away. So how does he get my attention? And he's going to get it for free through news media, hopefully, which is even increasingly hard because there's not a lot of journalists that are writing about literature anymore. So you have to be clever. And I think you have a group of students and college students or people like Steve said that are interested to help. You have them work with social media, how to get your word out there for free. Don't spend $250 or $500 or $750 for a 1/4-inch ad in any kind of periodical, even if it's, I could give you lots of examples, but we have a little bit of time left. It's just not worth the money unless you have lots of money to burn.
But that's a perfect transition to the joke about publishing. How do you make $1 million in publishing? Start with 2. It's not always a money-making thing, and journals in particular are not usually a money-making thing. Many of them, and this is actually starting to a bit fall off the wayside, traditionally they were supported by universities, and universities all had their journal. And these things started to go away because universities didn't want to pay for them, because they are not cash cows. You're not going to typically make a lot of money on doing a literary journal. And people going into a journal with that mentality, boy, it's going to be really hard. You're going to have to be really glossy in order to make the money. Most magazines in general don't make their money off of sales. They make their money off of advertisement. And in order to advertise, you have to have a really clear idea of what your clientele is and be able to sell that. What you're selling is access to that clientele. So for literary magazine, there's usually not a whole ton of advertising. And most of that money comes from funding. For instance, I feel very lucky SDSU is committed to having Oakwood, well, at least for now, committed to having Oakwood and keeping it as a thing, because we're coming up on our 50th anniversary here. It would be really nice to reach that. Haven't published every single year, but 50 years is pretty good in the life of a literary magazine. So we want to continue that and celebrate that. And the universities has been pretty supportive and pays for the printing. If you don't have money, then an online magazine is the way to go. But the thing is that too often people think that online magazines are just easier to do, and they're not. They require the same amount of effort to edit and to promote as a print magazine would. What's different is that you're not actually having a physical artifact. And there are even some magazines that will run online and establish themselves online and then transition into print. So I see this phenomenon a lot these days of, we're going to do 3 quarterly issues and then 1 print issue, and that's kind of happening. It's happening to some magazines that are starting up from scratch, and it's starting from some magazines that started out with print and lost their funding. So they're moving to the model of online, and then once a year they do print. So they're formerly quarterly magazines that would do that kind of thing. It's a very difficult world to find funding, and I believe that's one reason why people are going so much to online. And there are some great templates that you can use through WordPress that look quite wonderful for literary magazines. And people do them because they love them. And if you're looking to try to make money off of your literary magazine, it's probably going to be a really hard slog. People do it to build
And I
their
hated
careers.
hearing that when I first started too. I hated hearing that because I thought, oh, we're going to make, and it's different because a small press versus a journal and things like that. Those are 2 totally different things.
Mhm.
What Steve is talking about. And I think, I know the festival next year is in Brookings, but we should try to do this again, because once we start the discussion, it usually takes a half an hour, 40 minutes. Then we're in it. We should try to definitely do it again next year and come with some more questions, because there's just so many different extensions to this and what we can do and how you can do it. But hopefully we gave you some tools to get started with. And I like what Steve said about advertising. You really have to have a really good foundation and lots of readers before you start advertising. How are you going to get somebody to send you money to advertise in your journal? And what's your circulation? What are the numbers of readers that you have? They're going to ask you those questions right away, or they should. And you have to be able to quantify that. So those are some things to think about.
Yeah, it would be nice next year to maybe do like a workshop, like a hands-on workshop on just to sort of bring your magazine idea and just sort of have something like that.
And we should let's talk about that more, because we would need more time, and then we could help out more with that too. Because I don't want to discourage anybody. Maybe you have a better idea of advertising, and then you can share it with us, and then we'll all make money. But or support the journal, because both Steve and I have seen at both of our places a journal go up and down, and I've seen that at so many places. That's why if you even go look at North American Review right now, their presence is still physical as far as a hard copy, but also they have a huge online presence now that's really built up in the last 10 years. I mean, there's just so much more of that happening, and I think also to accommodate for the huge amount of submissions. I'm guessing that helps, right? And it builds your reader base too. If you're getting published in a magazine, well, then you read that magazine. So it works both ways, right? The editors, I think in a perfect world, we would like to publish a journal every day and publish everybody if it was good, but it's just so competitive. So out of the thousands of submissions you get, you end up taking 20 or 30. That's the reality of the game.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here. I think that's a great idea, the workshop idea for next year. And I'm going to make sure to follow up on that with Jennifer as well, because I think folks would really like to have that interactive opportunity with both of you. Yeah, so I guess, we haven't gotten any other questions unless somebody wants to put one in there real quickly. We'll try to wrap up here. I just want to say to both Jim and Steve, thanks for all the insight from both of you on both sides of the topic, from the writer and from the editor, from both perspectives.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for having us. And I think, yeah, it would be good. The workshop idea is definitely one. And I think even it would be good for your students too, Steve, when we're up there too, then, if we do this, it'll be in Brookings, and then maybe some of them could come, and even from Sioux Falls, and I can let my students know too, because this is this can draw in a lot of people. But when you really talk, I really like when Steve talked about the importance of this is, look, at the end of the day, what does everybody want? Whether you're a writer or not, right? You want your voice to be heard. We are still making documents, however they appear. And we do want our voices to be heard. We do want to make a difference in the world. I think that's at the root of everything. And our students want that too. More so, I think, than people know, the public. I think Steve and I will see it, but everybody wants their voice to be heard. And we are people that can help them with that. So I hope, and the public. So I hope we can share some ideas with you in the near future.
Cool.
Good.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.
So yes, so I'll just say on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, we'd like to thank both Jim and Steve for sharing your expertise, and thank all of you out there on Zoom and Facebook, all those audiences for attending this event. And we hope that you can enjoy many more presentations during our festival as your schedule allows. So don't forget to visit our website, sdbookfestival.com/virtual for more great programming, and come through the virtual 2021 South Dakota Festival of Books. So Jim or Steve, any final remarks before we leave each other?
See you around at the festival.
Yeah, we'll see you next year. Maybe we'll see you later on this weekend.
Okay.
Peace.
Well,
See you,
great.
Steve.
It's been
See you
great
guys.
sharing
Thanks,
this
Melinda.
time.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.